while, so we'd better start. Welcome everyone to the anniversary, the 3 decades that have gone past. This is the 30th summer school, International Summer School in Cognitive Science, which is hosted by the new Bulgarian University in Sofia, Bulgaria. Many people have signed in and registered, but we believe that it shouldn't be a problem to hopefully use this Zoom session for all our sessions. I'm not going to take a long time. I just want to say a couple of words. This is the summer school which started in 1994, so 30 years ago, by a colleague of ours who unfortunately passed away 11 years ago, Professor Petrov. He initiated the program in cognitive science, the master's program at this university, which was the only one, the first one in Eastern Europe. And it still continues. And we used to have these summer schools live here in person, and it was a lot of fun. But it turned out that more recently, we have changed the format to make this summer school accessible to everyone globally, and it's free of registration. There's no registration fee, and to give a chance to more people to get in touch with cognitive science. Cognitive science is something we all believe in here very much, and we hope that we are also practicing this very much on a daily basis. This edition has been, in my mind and the mind of the organizers here, dedicated to our alumni, the people who were with us, some of the very first students of the cognitive science program and of the summer school. And so we have 4 really prominent scientists, cognitive scientists, and you are aware of the program and the schedule, I'm sure. The first one is Professor Alex Petrov. There you are, who used to be a master's and a PhD student here in Sofia, and then went on to do a second PhD, good for him, with John Anderson. And then he continued to pursue various topics in his career in the United States. He's currently an associate professor at the Department of Psychology at Ohio State University. And Alex has been always very interested in a wide range of topics, but I think he would correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he has focused his research efforts mostly in studying relational cognition, relational processing, including analogy making, of course, but also visual perception related to relational reasoning. And at the same time, also, apart from doing research with empirical data, behavioral and other methodology, he's been very prominent in developing cognitive computational architectures and models of these high-level cognitive processes. So I'm extremely happy to be able to welcome Alex. Alex, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. You hear me. If there is a problem, let me know. So it is an honor for me to be here. It's glad to see so many people, although they're kind of little black squares with names on them. But let me share my screen. I have prepared some slides. So do you see the slides? Okay. I assume you do, although there is hard. Okay. So the title of my course will be Cognitive Science in the Age of Artificial General Intelligence. I will say why this is important, but before that, I must pay tribute to my mentor and friend, and everybody is talking about him. We remember him very fondly. Boychuk Kokinov, one of the, perhaps the central figure, the forerunner of cognitive, the scientific study of cognitive science in Bulgaria. Of course, before him, there were many other people doing related things, but as far as I know, he was the one to organize the Cognitive Science Society, Bulgarian Cognitive Science Society. He spearheaded the program of cognitive science at the New Bulgarian University and so forth. At the time, that is the early 90s, I was an undergraduate student, and it was my good fortune to come across Boichu in one of the courses at the Faculty of Mathematics that I was studying. And I was very impressed. And then I kind of followed him, and he became my advisor. And gradually we became friends, and eventually he became like a second father to me. So his premature death was a major blow. I'm still kind of reeling from that. I remember him very fondly, and I wish it was possible for him to somehow see all of this. And I think he would have liked what I have to say today. Three important lessons that I learned from him scientifically. I also learned a lot of even more important lessons as a person, but that's a separate conversation. With respect to cognitive science, there are these three things that he really emphasized, and I kind of took it from him, and I have been following in his footsteps ever since. The first was the emphasis on cognitive architecture. As you may know, he had one of his own, the cognitive architecture dual, and I worked on that a little bit, but it was his baby. He developed it before we ever met, and he was working on dual all the way until his premature death. A cognitive architecture is some kind of grand blueprint, overall theory about how many pieces there are in the mind and how they fit together. So it's a kind of big picture outline. So these are very ambitious projects, and it takes courage to deal with cognitive architectures, but that is, in the end, that's the kind of final goal of our science. We want to have an overall coherent picture of how all the pieces fit together. So this is one topic I learned from him. The other is that the mind is very complex. There are many parts, also the brain, and there are various disciplines that study the mind and the brain. As you know, cognitive science is very interdisciplinary. And if you read the literature and talk to people, there is this cacophony of voices. Everybody is like studying a small piece, and they think the piece they study is more important than they actually is. In many ways, it reminds us of the famous parable of the blind man and the elephant. Incidentally, this picture is it comes straight from one of our papers that Boichu published, and I was a co-author. As far as I know, the artist is his daughter or his wife, Stella, either one or the other. Third, the strive for integration. So yes, there are multiple pieces and multiple sciences all collaborating on a kind of big enterprise, but eventually, at least the hope is that in the fullness of time, all of these will come together and somehow become one story about how everything works together. So these are three things. They will be present in the lectures, as we will see. But on the note of kind of going back in the past, because this is an anniversary summer school, it was my good fortune to be a student in the audience of the very first summer school in 1994. So this is my former self. I can barely recognize myself here. As you can see, I had a lot more hair and a lot less fat on my body. But it was a great time. Some of these. So here's Boichu, Encho Gerganov. I want to recognize him as well. And some of my friends, anyway, so that's an old picture, 30 years ago. And then in the interest of just kind of cheering up the mood, 4 years after the very first school, there was this first workshop on analogy making that Bojch organized again at a New Bulgarian University. And it so happened I defended my PhD dissertation there. So this is me and myself during my defense. Afterwards, there were questions from the committee, and I kind of have this puzzled look, and Bojch is kind of hovering behind me, and I'm literally kind of under his wing. And then these are the congratulations afterwards. This picture is notable with that 3 of the lecturers of today's summer school are part here. So here's me, and this is Kalina Christoph, who will be talking tomorrow. This is the back of her head, but I assure you that I remember very well. And then Morris is probably in the audience, and then Evil Life will be talking on Friday, I think. So this is where we all started. And then my personal path, I defended my PhD in 1998, but a month before my defense, I also had submitted applications to become a graduate student at the Carnegie Mellon University. And I got accepted, and I went to the US, to Pittsburgh, in John Anderson's lab, and said, here I am, John, I'm very happy to be your student, but just so you know, I already have a PhD from Bulgaria. And he said, well, congratulations, but your visa is a student visa and everything is set for you to be a student. So I became a student. It so happened 1 year later, he said, you know what? You don't have to take courses and do all of this all over again. If you have a PhD, let's just move on. And do you want to become a postdoc? And I said, sure. And so is in the end, after all said and done, the one and only PhD degree that I have is from the New Bulgarian University, and it has served me well ever since. Nobody doubted that it is a valid degree, and so I'm a proud NBU alumnus. I think I'm the very first PhD defended in the cognitive science program. I'm not sure whether it was the first doctorate at the university as a whole, but in 1998, I was certainly one of the first. Anyway, so that is some personal stuff, but unless there are questions, I don't know how I can even know whether there are questions. I will try to make this somewhat interactive to the extent that the Zoom format allows. Maybe there are some chat windows and things that I can monitor, or somebody please alert me if there is some reason for me to stop talking and pay attention to the chat. I don't see the chat right now. So let's get to the actual substantive part of the talk, because I have a lot to talk about, and it may be that I'm not going to finish today, and that's how it is. We are in the age of artificial general intelligence, and that is like a mirror. These artificial intelligences are like a mirror that force us to take a good look at ourselves, humans. They raise a lot of important questions, even some existential threats. And so it's very important that we pay attention to this entirely new situation. So just to set up the stage, I'm not going to talk about artificial intelligence very much, but it is something kind of always present in the background. There's this ominous shadow, as it were, at least in my mind. I'm very worried about the rise of the AIs. And so here on this plot is the performance of various benchmarks. So every line is the performance on benchmarks. So there are benchmarks having to do with computer vision. For example, ImageNet here in the purple line. Do you see my mouse, by the way? Okay. You can show me thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. So then
Yes.
the purple is ImageNet. the whole thing is normalized so that 0 is a human performance and -1 is the original kind of baseline when the benchmarking question was first published. Typically, there is some kind of model that was tested on that benchmark and it performed at a certain level. Let's say it got 76% accurate, and that was labeled -1, and human performers are like 97% accurate, and that would be 0%. And as you can see, as a function of time, the year is at the bottom, there's this relentless drive upwards. Benchmarks get saturated 1 or 2 years after they are developed, sometimes less. And so the later lines here, these are actually more difficult tasks, harder images, more ambiguous images, and so forth, or speech with different speakers, with noise, mathematical reasoning. The problems get more and more difficult. And so the later lines are more difficult problems, but as you can see, they rise even steeper. So there is this very rapid progress, and it is accelerating. And in many of these tasks, more and more tasks, computers get superhuman performance. And there is a book that I recommend by Max Tegmark called Life 3.0. And in there is this interesting figure, the landscape of human competence. So the different points here are different things that humans do. Things like doing arithmetic, playing chess, recognizing speech, driving a car, and up here in the mountains, there is doing science and writing a book and drawing an artwork or making a movie and so forth. So there are these different tasks, and the height represents difficulty for computers. So, for example, arithmetic is very easy for computers. Science and research is hard, and there are these other tasks in between. And the sea level represents what computers are able to do at a given time. And the main point of this figure is that the sea level is rising very fast. So it flooded the chess. Computers became chess champions in 1997. The board game of Go is a lot harder. So it stood up for another 20 years, but now the strongest Go player on planet Earth is a computer program. And now they are computers that is can translate from any language to any other language. They're writing programs. And so things are kind of rising relentlessly. And it is many experts predict that in the not so distant future, in a matter of 20 years, let's say, the level will rise all the way, and computers will be able to do anything that a human being can do. And there is no reason to expect that that would be the limit. So human performance is not some kind of magic limit of intellectual abilities. And then we'll get into the age of these supercomputers, and then all bets are off. It is not guaranteed at all we humans will still be in control of our home planet and our destiny. And that is also driven by this progress in AI, that is driven by prodigious computational resources. There are these supercomputers now that are literally as big as cities. It's not like there is a big computer which is as big as a house. They're like square kilometers covered with racks, rack upon rack of computer upon computer. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for the electricity, for the air conditioning. And there is a lot of interest in this, a lot of money is available, investment, and companies such as OpenAI and Facebook and Google and Amazon and some Chinese companies, they invest billions of dollars every month to buy new computers and build new computational resources. Here on this diagram is the amount of computation, or as the machine learning people call it, compute nowadays. So they use the word compute as a noun. So the more compute, the more the model can do. So this is how much compute it takes to train a particular model. The vertical scale is logarithmic. So a straight line actually represents exponential growth. And I know you cannot quite read this on your screens over Zoom, but every dot is a model. And here you have like GPT-3 and AlphaGo and other programs like this. The point is, there is this massive increase in computer speed because of hardware improvements, Moore's law and all of that, on top of just extensive kind of buying of more clusters, more building up of new centers, and there is a lot of computational power hiding behind these systems, the artificial intelligence systems. By comparison, the human brain computes about 20 watts of power, and it cannot be upgraded. We are kind of locked into the volume of our skull, and this is it. And because of considerations of this nature, some very serious experts are sounding the alarm. Specifically, there was about a year ago, the following one sentence warning was published on and publicized across the media, across the internet. It reads as follows. This is a direct quotation. The entirety of the warning is as follows. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI. Extinction is the same verb that is used for dinosaurs and things like that. So the human species, Homo sapiens, may become extinct. So mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. So the whole existence of humanity is at stake. And that sounds like science fiction, but sometimes science fiction has to be taken seriously. Not too long ago, submarines were science fiction, like Jules Verne and Captain Nemo 100 years ago. There were no submarines, so that was science fiction. Rockets flying in space and going to the moon were science fiction. Robots were science fiction. And now all of these things have come to pass. And the authors of this warning are hundreds of prominent AI researchers headed by some really, really prominent names. So in particular, Yoshua Bengio and Jeff Hinton are two of the three people who recently received the prestigious Turing Award. This is like a Nobel Prize for computer science. About 5 years ago, three people, Bengio, Hinton, and Yann LeCun, received the Turing Award for their contributions to machine learning and deep networks. And then there are other prominent AI people. Let's not go over them. Ilya Sutskever, for example, he has his name on 3 of the key publications about AlexNet, which unlocked the kind of image recognition revolution, and then ChatGPT and transformers architecture and all of that. So these are not some kind of fringe group of crackpots who don't know what they're talking about. These are some of the most authoritative figures in the field of computer science and artificial intelligence. And they use words like risk of extinction, existential risks, and so forth. So this one sentence summary was published a year ago. And then just a couple of weeks ago, the following article came out in the journal Science. As you know, Science is a peer-reviewed journal. It is like the most prestigious journal of all sciences ever. So there is no more prestigious outlet of that. And again, Yoshua Bengio and Jeff Hinton had the list of authors. And among there is also Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize laureate. So very serious people in a very prominent journal warn us as follows. There are some voices in the background. Is that something I should pay attention to, or just keep going? Okay, I keep going. So we must take seriously the possibility that highly powerful generalist AI, I should probably comment on that, AI, like a chess playing program, would still qualify as artificial intelligence, but it is very narrow. The one thing it can do is play chess. So that is the so-called narrow artificial intelligence. This is not an existential risk. When it gets scary is when you have a program that can do hundreds or thousands of different tasks. If I go back to this figure here with the landscape of human competence, so if one system can do, let's say, half of what a human being can do, so it can play chess and translate languages and also do programming and also memorize things and so forth, then it becomes a generalist AI, or AGI, artificial general intelligence. And so we must take seriously the possibility that highly powerful generalist AI systems that outperform human abilities across many critical domains will be developed within this decade or the next. So it's not some matter of some kind of distant future, 100 years from now. It is just around the corner. Of course, nobody really knows exactly when it will happen, but many experts actually predict things like in the order of a few years. And then what happens then? Because as you know, intelligence is a power. We humans are not as fast as many animals on Earth. We are not as strong as many animals on Earth. We don't have sharp claws. We don't have any kind of really powerful weapons. And yet, we put tigers and sharks in cages because we outsmart them. We figure out that if you go and make a kind of dig in the earth and pick up some stones and put them in this furnace and bake them using coal, you get these material called steel. And then out of steel, you can make a cage and you can put the tiger in the cage. So it takes a lot of cleverness to do that. So cleverness allows you to kind of subdue entities that are less intelligent than you are. And so if we are no longer the most intelligent species on Earth, we may lose our commanding positions that we enjoy at present. And without sufficient caution, this paper warns, we may irreversibly lose control of autonomous AI. And this unchecked AI advancement could culminate in a large-scale loss of life. It is not inconceivable that AI may decide that it wants to convert the resources of the earth into computing centers and cut down the forests and things like that, and treat the biosphere as some kind of annoying kind of mold on the surface of the planet, for example. This is just one scenario, just to show what we have to consider. I don't say this is what's going to happen, but there are lots, thousands of things of this nature that are not inconceivable. So this unchecked AI advancement could culminate in a large-scale loss of life and the marginalization or extinction of humanity. And then in this 4 or 5 page paper, the authors outline some things, measures to be taken. We need international treaties, regulation, and so forth and so on. So this is not what I plan to talk about in this lecture, but it sets the motivation. Why is it that I selected to talk about these specific topics that I'm going to tell you about? I plan to teach an entire course about artificial general intelligence and the ethics and safety of that. I've prepared this flow chart. The question is very complex and multifaceted, and there are a variety of questions. So is superintelligence is an artificial general intelligence that far exceeds human capabilities? Is it possible in principle? We could talk about a whole hour about this one question. most likely the answer is yes. If it is possible in principle, will it actually happen on Earth in the foreseeable future? Again, we can debate, but many experts say yes, it is very likely. And that raises the so-called control problem. So if there is a super intelligent entity on Earth, how are we going to control it? Will it do what we want it to do, or will it take over? And the control problem is something that motivates my first lecture. Today's lecture is motivated by something which is closely related to the control problem. And there is this question: can a less intelligent entity control a significantly more intelligent one? To give you an analogy, suppose your dog wants to keep you from leaving your home. It has locked all the doors and all the windows, and you are now the prisoner of your dog. The dog has all the keys, and the dog controls your access and things like that. But the dog still wants to talk to you and kind of interact with you. It's not like they locked you in your home and then threw away the key and walked away from the house. The dog wants to interact with you, but keep you a prisoner. The question is, do you think, how long do you think the dog will be able to maintain you as a prisoner? And the intuition is it's very likely that you will figure out some kind of scheme, kind of bribe the dog or make him fall asleep or something like that, or find some kind of hack the lock of the door or whatever. So the dog can never really keep a human being inside a cage, because for very long, they may succeed for a few days or weeks, but not in the long term. The more intelligent entity breaks free. So that is the worry about these super intelligences. We humans will try to keep them somehow controllable in some kind behind a firewall, for example. But is that really a realistic proposition? So this is one question. That's the so-called control problem. Many people think, and I agree with them, that the answer is no. Intelligence finds a way to break free of any kind of it's a race, and the clever entity wins. And then once the AI is out there in free, it can do whatever it wants. Then you get this second hope. Maybe they will want to take care of us, and we'll kind of there will be good AIs and not take over, but just take care of us and help us because they love people, and we will build them in such a way that they love us and they take care of us. And this is known as the alignment problem. And that is related to the last lecture, if I don't run out of time before that, because the alignment problem is about what people want and how can an artificial intelligence help people. And that raises questions: what do people actually want, and what is hurting them, what is beneficial to them? And if you go down this rabbit hole, there are two questions that are relevant. One is nothing short than the so-called problem of the meaning of life. And the fourth lecture, there is this scary phrase. It doesn't sound very scientifically respectable, but this is actually doesn't have to be the case. You can talk seriously about the meaning of life. This is not a topic that you only discuss when you have had 3 glasses of beer and it's like after midnight. All right, so these are some of the topics surrounding this problem of artificial general intelligence with superhuman capabilities. And all of these things, you know this, it has to do with artificial intelligence, it has to do with human beings, it has to do with brains. We communicate with those things using human language, so linguistics is related. And I didn't mention it, but one of the issues is, are these agents, artificial agents, going to be conscious? How can we tell? And so philosophy of mind is also the part of the picture. And surprise, surprise, these are precisely the disciplines that collectively constitute cognitive science. So due to its interdisciplinary nature, cognitive science is ideally placed to contribute to this important conversation. Arguably, one of the most important conversations of our age is, what are we going to do with these artificial intelligences? Do we want to build them? Is it a good idea to build them? If we don't want to build them, how can we prevent ourselves from building them? If we do build them, what kind of goals should we put inside them? And how will human beings change? One thing that I didn't talk about, but how will humans change if every human has a kind of artificial robot as a servant that fulfills their every wish? It is not at all clear. This is actually something that most people will thrive. But okay, so this is the setup. I'm already halfway, half an hour into my time limit here. So there is a series of 4 lectures. The overarching title is Cognitive Science is the Age of Artificial General Intelligence. The first lecture, today's lecture, is about layered organization of the brain and mind. Next time, so it is very possible I will not finish this whole lecture today. I have like 70 slides and I'm on slide number 10 and I have spoken for 30 minutes already. I apologize, that happens a lot to me. So maybe I will just keep talking for next time, but we will go through that lecture. And then when we do, the next thing on the menu is about unification of cognitive science and affective science. As we'll see, emotion and motivation is absolutely central part of this conversation. Whenever you talk about agents with goals and benefits and risks and harm, emotions are right there front and center. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many, cognitive science has neglected emotion more or less for way too long, and that it is long overdue that we correct this. Other scientists have been studying emotions, and they have a name for their science, affective science. I would argue we have to join forces, and cognitive science and affective science should come together and make one bigger science. I don't know the name for that. Maybe mental science will be a good label. So that's the second lecture, either next time or on Wednesday, or some kind of half and half. And then there are these very interesting topics about types of computation. I may have to cut some of that in the interest of time, because I do want to leave at least an hour to talk about the alignment problem and the meaning of human life. That would be on the last day, on Thursday. Okay, and so let's get started. Lecture 1, layered organization of the brain and mind. As I said before, the motivating question is, can a less intelligent entity control a significantly more intelligent one? And there are some very interesting lessons to be drawn from the organization of the mammalian brain. So there will be a lot of brains in this. And whenever you talk about brains or anything biological, really, you have to, and if you want to talk about it in a serious, theoretically sophisticated way, there is no way to do it without talking about in evolutionary terms. To cite the prominent evolutionary biologist Theodosius Dobzhansky, who, by the way, is from Ukrainian descent, as far as I know. So he said famously, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And so we'll talk about the evolution of the brain and things like that. And it turns out Dobzhansky put this famous quote in a talk that he gave, and he was citing an earlier statement by a theologian, a Christian theologian and scientist, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who said, evolution is a light which illuminates all facts, a curve that all lines must follow. So evolutionary theory is compatible with religion, They are these people who say God's plan for making the earth was to set kind of evolutionary process in motion. And to keep happy the humanitarian listeners. So because I've talked to people and people from the humanities, cultural anthropologists and students of culture and literature and so forth in the arts, and they always kind of cringe when everything is reduced to biology and brains, and they say, wait a minute, what about art and culture and language and symbols and narratives and all of that? And so here is this little ribbon here saying, in the human case, when we talk about evolution, we must explicitly include cultural evolution as well. So every human being inherits from their parents two things: biological inheritance, genes and epigenetic stuff, and also cultural inheritance, such as language and symbols and ideas and religion and so forth. And it's all part of the package. Okay. And so then, but still, a lot of these considerations will be informed mostly from biological considerations and biological evolution. And the first thing to know about biological creatures is that each animal is an autonomous agent in some ecological niche. This is the name of the game. So organisms are these autonomous agents, and there are a lot of niches. So evolution by natural selection shapes the bodies and the brains of animals so that they are well adapted to live in some ecological niche or the other. For example, mountain goats are good at climbing and they graze grass, and they are well adapted to live high up in the mountains, and their brains support that kind of lifestyle. And here's another creature, a bat, which lives in a cave and navigates using echolocation, and it has a sense organ for ultrasound and so forth and so on. And so different niches, different body plans, different brain organization. And humans are animals too, and they too live in a certain niche, and that niche includes culture. And that is why in the human case, the biological evolution is complemented with cultural evolution. We'll discuss that when we talk about the meaning of human life. It is very important consideration, and that will be on Thursday. But for the time being, let's focus on the important concept of autonomous agent. So brains are control devices for autonomous agents. This is the kind of starting point. And I have prepared, so the lecture has these 4 things or 3 things plus a time for questions at the end. So the first is, it will be an interdisciplinary approach. I will show you a few mechanical robots. So not biological agents, but robotic agents. And then we'll talk about mammalian brains and something about the so-called selection problem. We'll see what it is when we get there. So, robots. It all begins with the body. So yes, it is about brains, but brains control bodies, and bodies can do a lot of things, and a well-designed body simplifies the control problem enormously. And this is a good place. I found when I teach this, by the way, I teach this, and I've been teaching this course called Introduction to Cognitive Science. I've been teaching it for over 17 years now. Many of the slides here are taken from this course. And when I teach it, I found that in this particular topic here, a picture really is worth 1,000 words, and a video is worth 1,000 pictures. So let me play you this video, which is hopefully worth like 1,000,000 words. Here is a robot. Let's see if you can see it. There is no sound. Don't worry, don't see sound. But this is the famous passive dynamic walker. So Jenny, can you please show me thumbs up that you see the video and everything moves? All right, thank you. So then what is notable about this thing is that it has no power supply other than gravity and no computer of any kind. There is no nothing. There is no control. It is a system of levers and springs and joints. And yet it walks, powered by gravity. And it kind of, the arms swing and the legs kind of put one over the other, just driven by the laws of physics. Pure dynamics. And so that is a great illustration. It always kind of makes the point really well that complex behavior, such as walking, is possible even if you don't have a brain at all. And that is why part of the cognitive science is the study of dynamical systems. And there are things like phase portraits and systems of differential equations and attractor points and limit cycles and so forth and so on, which will not be part of this series of 4 lectures, but this is when we talk about mobile robots, the body of the robot is doing an important part of the work. So this is the first thing. And similarly, when I told you about biological agents adapted to their niches, it helps for the bat that it has wings and so forth and so on. But we're more interested in the brain and some kind of nervous system, some kind of controller. And so this is one of the pioneers of robotics, a British roboticist by the name of Gray Walter, who developed in the 1950s, 75 years ago, some of the, he called them tortoises, like little turtle-like robots. They were built of electronic components and actually electromechanical components such as relays and such and so forth. So in a very crude sense, this has, if you liken it to a nervous system, this thing has like 3 neurons. And yet it has quite sophisticated behaviors. Let me play video number 2. Let's see if it will work. Now this one has sound. So Jenny, tell me if you see it here.
Toby's head, or rather magic eye, is a photoelectric cell constantly revolving until it picks up the strongest source of light, to which it is then attracted. In this case, an ordinary electric torch guides the mechanical tortoise in any direction its inventor chooses. It can also negotiate obstacles. When it hits an object, the pressure on the shell causes a short circuit of the photoelectric cell mechanism, and the tortoise moves at random until it is free of the obstacle. With a stronger source of light placed in position, Toby is attracted to the lamp in the same way as a moth is attracted by light. Now the front wheel of the tricycle undercarriage, which is coupled to the photoelectric cell motor, is turning on its axle while the 2 back wheels remain static. And the
okay, I guess that's enough. So these robots that only have like 3 neurons, they behave in many ways like insects. And that's interesting in its own right. It doesn't take a lot of neural cells to have to actually make a living as an insect. And that is why insects kind of burn themselves in lights and so forth and so on. But so this was like 1950s. 20 years later, we get to the 1970s, and these little tortoise-like robots were consistent, terribly old-fashioned, these kind of negative feedback loops that cybernetics studied. These were considered kind of old, uninteresting, simple-minded robots. All the action was in these computers. Computer was the new idea of the time, and robots were driven by computers, and the predominant paradigm in cognitive science and robotics was the so-called symbolic paradigm based on logic and propositional calculus and theorem proving and search and so forth and so on. And a very famous robot by the name of Shaky is credited for being the first mobile robot to integrate perception, planning, and execution. Much subsequent research in robotics and AI has been influenced by Shaky. It's a kind of showcase example of the so-called good old-fashioned artificial intelligence, or GoFi approach to robotics. And there is this wonderful vintage video of Shaky in action, dated 1971, so half a century old. I will play this brief excerpt. So here's the actual robot. One thing that I should mention, because computers are very slow in the 1970s, Shaky couldn't actually move very fast, and it lived in a very static environment, and it would kind of move a little and then stop and think for 30 minutes, and then move some more and then stop and think for another 30 minutes. And then a vacuum tube will blow out, and some human will run into the computer and take the burnt out vacuum tube and put a new one in place and keep going like this. So it was a very slow, torturous enterprise. And to survive that, Shaky didn't have any chance in any kind of complex environment with anybody moving around. So everybody was static. But roboticists even then appreciated that the real world is not like that. And so they introduced this wonderful character in the movie that is called Gremlin Charlie, which kind of is in that sanitized, simple world, simple environment that Shaky inhabited. Gremlin Charlie is the agent of change, because in robotics, in the real world, things do not always go as planned. Wheels slip, or objects move, or things just happen. There is this famous saying, shit happens, and roboticists are painfully aware of that. And so here's the video of Shaky and Gremlin Charlie kind of doing mischief. One of my students' favorites of all time. Let's see, share that. Shaky.
Versus it to the goal.
So this is how it moves. And it will push these big red blocks.
Another intermediate level action pushes coordinates
from one room to another.
Is their ability to recover from unforeseen accidents. Our gremlin, Charlie, symbolizes an agent of change unknown to Shaky. Shaky sensors tell him that the box has slipped off the push bar, but his cat whiskers tell him where the box is, so he can get behind it and resume pushing.
Okay, so this was in 1971. Now, things have changed since then. The robots of today are a lot better, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's keep talking about Shaky. I see I have one or two more things to say about that. So first of all, the organization of motor control there was strictly hierarchical. There are these 4 or 5 levels. At the bottom is the actual hardware of there is this robot, and it has motors, and you can say like this motor applied torque of that much torque for that many seconds on the left wheel, things like that. So this is level 1. And based on those commands, which are kind of hardwired into the actual hardware of the robot, the computer has the so-called low-level actions, such as roll, turn, like roll forward 1 meter. This is a low-level action. On the basis of those, by stringing many of those together, the next level up the hierarchy is the so-called intermediate level actions. Things like push this box from this door to that corner. That would be an intermediate level action. And then those in turn are building blocks for larger, the next level of the hierarchy up is plans. Shaky lived in there are multiple rooms, and it will kind of have a plan. If I want to get from room A to room B, I want to go through the door, but the door is blocked by some box, so I have to push the box away, things like that. And so there was this hierarchy of like Lisp programs calling other Lisp programs, which called other Lisp programs, and this is how the whole thing was organized. And this is an example of a very prominent way of doing things, which goes all the way to René Descartes. And the main idea is that the agent, the robot in this case, but it could also be a mammal or a human being, makes an internal representation of the world. So there are some sensors, some cameras, some whiskers, some eyeballs, retinas. And so you have sensors and you kind of observe data from the outside world. This is the process of perception. And then based on perception, you build an internal model of the world. And then you kind of sit there and do information processing inside your head for 30 minutes or an hour, if necessary. Like a chess player considering what move to make, and they just sit there doing nothing for 10 minutes and just calculate different combinations. If I play this, the opponent will play that, and I can counter this, and so forth. So that's planning. And finally, you formulate a plan. And then you the plan goes through these hierarchy of commands, like higher level actions that resolve into low level actions, which in turn resolve into these primitive instructions for the hardware. And that is a viable way of doing business, and it has a lot of things to recommend it. I will talk about that, but it also have some very grave shortcomings. And two are very important. First, because planning is time consuming, the world may change during the planned process in a way that invalidates the resulting plan. So Shaky is sitting there calculating the plan, and Gremlin Charlie comes along and moves things around. And now the plan is out of date. So that's problem number one. And problem number two, and now it's analogous, and that is, even before you get to make the plan, your model of the environment can also be out of date, because not everything is observable and there is noise and so forth and so on. The old saying, the map is not the territory, fully applies in this case. And so I can show you here, one of my next videos about these robots that do silly things because of the planned actions are not quite appropriate for the changed circumstances. So there was this DARPA challenge. The defense agency in the United States were giving millions of dollars. Some 5 years ago, there was this big challenge about robots navigating a course. And so these are some of the failures experienced by these robots on this course. So this one, for example, wants to turn this red valve here, but it doesn't know, part of its internal model is it thinks it's straight in front of the valve, but it's actually 1 foot to the left. But the whole thing is set like, do this motion, and it will do it in the air, and see what happens. There are these other things. So the world is a very unforgiving place, both for a robot and for biological agents as well. And so you have to be very quick on your feet. Otherwise, things are not going to go down well. Now, what am I sharing? I begin to lose track. I want my slides. Yes, share that. Okay, so then, a major development in robotics occurred in the mid-1980s, associated with this guy, a roboticist from MIT called Rodney Brooks. So he came up with something called behavioral-based robotics. He made some very famous robots that were very agile and quick on their feet, and they could move like 1,000 times faster than the other robots of the day, because they were built in an entirely radically different kind of way of doing things. So I already mentioned this sense, plan, act architecture. So you start with the sensors, build a model, plan, formulate a plan, then execute the plan. So this is sense, plan, act. Rodney Brooks says, no, 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 this is not how agents should be organized. Rather, you want to organize things in behavioral levels. So you have different levels, like locomote is one level, avoid hitting things is a higher level that depends on locomote. Explore is a higher level that depends on avoid hitting things. And so you have this hierarchy of levels, but importantly, every level is self-contained. Every level has access to the sensors and can drive the motors or the muscles. And even if you kind of take away the top of this tower, the bottom levels keep functioning. So the very first behavior-based robot was called Alan, which I think was a kind of practical joke against Alan Newell, a chief proponent of the GoFi approach. So the robot Alan had these 3 levels. It was implemented one summer at MIT. The first level was avoid contact with other objects, including moving objects that want to come and grab you. So if somebody approaches you, run away from them. Do not allow to be touched. So that's level 1. Level 2, wander around aimlessly. So if there is nothing coming at you, don't just stay still, start kind of moving slowly and at random. This is what it was actually implemented in 1986. And they had in mind level 3, which was use vision to select interesting places to visit. And they couldn't solve the problem of vision in one summer. So the third level involving vision never really got off the ground. But levels 1 and 2 were very successful. These are some of the ideas. So there are these range finders right here around the rim, around the head of the robot. I don't want to get into the details, but the robot has a way of sensing the distance to the nearest object in 16 directions around the clock. And on this basis, it can kind of build a vector field. It kind of feels repelling force. If something comes towards you, kind of generates this force that wants to make the robot move away in the opposite direction. And then you combine them in a very simple way using vector summation. And here, this is a figure taken from a textbook on behavioral-based robotics. If you have an obstacle that generates these repulsive forces, you don't want to touch the obstacle. Let's say this is some kind of stinky object. The closer you get to it, the more it smells, and you don't like the smell. So you're repelled, pushed away. That's the obstacle. It generates this field of arrows kind of pushing you away from it. And there is some goal here, some kind of desirable thing. You want to get to the goal. And so let's say you start here in this corner and you simply follow the arrows and you make this nice kind of graceful trajectory around the obstacle and into the goal. And if the obstacle itself moves or the goal object moves, you will chase them and avoid them very dynamically without the need to do a lot of planning on the computer using an internal model. Everything is out there in the world. And so this is the flow diagram of the controller of this robot. It was manageable. You could actually understand how it works if you read a 10-page paper. And it used the so-called subsumption architecture. There are these different levels, and every level kind of capitalizes, uses the existing behaviors on the level below and then adds new functionality. And the name subsumption is that higher levels can overrule lower levels. A principle that was revised later, as we'll see in a moment. And so these models were very agile. These robots, they could run around and you will chase them and they will run away from you. And Rodney Brooks had a pair of models, Tom and Jerry. And Tom was set to always chase Jerry, and Jerry was set to always run away from Tom. And they were running around at high speeds and didn't bump into any obstacles, which was just unheard of agility in the 1980s when these robots came around. And so all roboticists were very impressed, but it didn't take long to recognize that this style of robotics also has a lot of shortcomings. And so there is this spectrum of robot control. Both things are desirable, and it is hard to get one and the other over the same kind of type of controller. So on the one end of the spectrum is the behavioral-based robotics. They're reactive, reflexive systems. They do not build internal models, internal representations. They have real-time responses based on very simple computation, low-level kind of insect-like intelligence, going all the way to this tortoise of gray water. It just follows the light, and whenever the light moves, it just follows. So that's on the one side here. A very important advantage is these things are very quick, and sometimes you must be quick. Here is an example of when you need to be quick. My final video, I think, for the day. So when you interact with the real world, and times is just what it is, and if you're slow, you fall and you break and you die. So you have to kind of be as quick as it takes to survive the physics of the world. So this is an old behavioral-based robot, relatively old, now it's maybe 10 years old. It's called Big Dog. This is a very famous video. I'm sure many of you are smiling already. So here it slips on black ice. Now it's kind of slowed down. So the foot slips on the ice. Kremlin Charlie is doing mischief. And the body will hit the ground unless the other legs kind of catch it in time. And so you don't have time to fool around. If you are an actual embodied agent out there in the real world, as opposed to some kind of sanitized laboratory somewhere, you have to move very quick. And so behavioral-based robotics are good at that. On the other hand, you cannot go like in 5 days, I will fly to Bulgaria. I'm now in the US. And so I've made a plan ahead of time. I know I have to go to my car and drive to the garage at the airport and take a shuttle and go to the terminal and take my shoes off and pass through security and do the whole song and dance with passport control and so forth and so on. I know this in advance. There is no way a kind of complex future action like that can be implemented along the lines of kind of having force vectors and following the wall to get out of the building and all of that. So you clearly must be able to make plans. And this is the other pole here. Deliberative, world model based, slower, but involving higher level intelligence. And to be successful, you need to be able to do both kinds of things. And in their textbook on artificial intelligence, this is a famous textbook, and the two authors are signatories of these warnings I talked about in the beginning. It is natural to ask, which of these different agent architectures should an agent use? And the answer is you don't have to choose. You want all of them. This is one of the take-home messages of today's lecture. You need hybrid agent architectures because they combine the best of both worlds. At the lower level, you have reflexive circuits that catch you when you slip on the ice, and you move your legs before you even realize what happened. And then you kind of, after the fact, you realize, oh, gee, it's good that I didn't fall here. I could have broken my leg. So that's reflexive, behavioral-based control. And on the other hand, knowledge-based deliberation allows you to plan ahead and kind of buy tickets and go to the airport and know which gate to go to and all that. And that brings us to this figure. So Boyce will be happy. Here are the blind man and the elephant, and we're integrating them by putting the different pieces together. So you have now your architecture, your sensors and actuators, and at the bottom level, you have your reactive reflexive system, which catches you when you slip on the ice. And then on top of that, you have your knowledge-based AI planning, memory-based reflective system that plans for the future, remembers the past, and so forth. And actually, it turns out 2 levels are not quite enough. You actually need 3, or at least most robots today often use a 3-level hierarchy. The topmost is task planning, like move to the door, open it, go to the elevator, press the button. It operates at that level. Or in my example, go to the airport, clear security, board the airplane, such and so, travel to Amsterdam, take off the plane, and so forth. That's task planning, the top level. The medium level is motor planning, which is find a path that gets the robot from one point to another. Like open the door and walk out of the building and kind of look in front of you and find which door to go through. That's motion planning. And then you get to actual low-level control, which is about moving the individual muscles, and if you slip, kind of catching yourself in time. And for this bottom-most level, you need control theory and dynamical system theory, not symbolic AI. And all of that culminates. Modern robots use these layered architectures. It turns out I lied to you. This wasn't the last video I will play. This is now the last video I will play, I think. Now there are these robots that are really very advanced, and they do gymnastics and things like that. Okay, so this is related to this notion that AI is getting better and better on all kinds of tasks, including robotics. I hope this you had fun with this. The problem is I only have 15 minutes left, but I'm through the first section here. So I will continue in earnest and tell you about mammalian brains. Now you're kind of shifting gears in a major way. Until now we had mechanical electronic brains and mechanical bodies. Now we have carbon-based neural network brains and biological bodies. Once again, evolution is our guiding light. And the first thing to know about brain evolution is that brains evolve like cities grow, from the inside out. This is one of the most important slides today. So the oldest and most important structures are in the middle. So consider here, this is an old map of Paris. As you know, Paris is on the river Seine. There is this little island here in the this little tiny speck on the map. This is the heart of the city. It's called Ile de la Cité. And the Notre Dame is there. The Palace of the King was there. There was a time the entire Paris fit on this one island, naturally fortified because it is surrounded by water on all sides. So the Gauls of old made a settlement on that one island, and that became Paris. And then after a while, they kind of settled a little bit around that, and a little bit around that, and a little bit around that. And to that day, the plan of Paris, it is organized in this so-called arrondissement, the different districts of Paris, and they are like snail-like. Number one is Ile de la Cité, and they go around in a kind of spiral outward. So newer structures accrete around the older central core, and everything is conserved. So they didn't destroy the cathedral when they make new suburbs. And that still is the old cathedral where the kings are buried and all of that. And so similarly with brains here on the left-hand side, everything began like with a little tube, a tube of nervous tissue. And that's the chordate brain, the chordates. That's a major phylum in zoology. People with a spinal cord, these are the chordates. We are chordates as well. And so vertebrate brains, sharks, codfish, amphibian, reptiles, birds, and mammals, they all have more or less, all of them are organized like a tube. And here I want to say, so this is the tube. If you go to a neurology textbook, there are these funny names from Greek like rhomencephalon and mesencephalon and prosencephalon. So they're partitioned on the basis of what kind of parts of the embryo give rise to this. So the embryo kind of grows a bunch of cells and then they differentiate, and this whole portion derived from one part of the tube and then the other portion derived from another. So very early on it looks like this, and later in embryologic development the frontmost part begins to fold back on itself and form the so-called telencephalon on the end brain. And in humans this is very developed, and the cortex, the cerebral cortex, is the telencephalon, which in humans occupies about 77% of the volume, and so forth. So then here's another body plan. These will be needed. I don't want to bury you with terminology, and I know for those of you who have studied neuroscience, this is old hat, and those of you who have not studied neuroscience, this is just, oh my God, 1,000 terms per minute. I cannot possibly memorize all of that, so don't worry. So the main point is it is organized as a sequence, and the more you get towards the tail, the older things are. The more you get towards the front, the newer things are. And also there is this medial to lateral. The more it's in the middle, down the midline of the brain, the older it is. The more it is to the side, the newer it is. And so you have these things like hindbrain and midbrain. And then I think this is called diencephalon or interbrain. One other confusing thing is that everything has multiple names in neuroanatomy. Some of them come from Greek, some of them come from Latin, some of them come from English. So it is built as a sequence of stages. And here, this is another diagram. If you want to make it, if you want to make a human brain, you start with something called the brainstem, and then you add the thalamus on top of that, and then around the thalamus you have hippocampus and amygdala, and then some seawater called cerebral ventricles, part of the primordial sea. We still carry it in our skull. And then a very important structure called the basal ganglia. And then there's a lot of cables. White matter is like insulated axons, cables. And at the very top you have the bark or cortex. Neuroscientists have built a classification. So these four terms I'll be using them. So I want to point out, I don't know how well you can see them, but so the primate brain or encephalon is divided into these two big divisions, brainstem and forebrain. The two big divisions, brainstem and forebrain. The brainstem itself is divided into hindbrain and midbrain. Hindbrain is here. Midbrain is here superior colliculus, inferior colliculus, and substantia nigra. And then interbrain, this third column, is the thalamus and the hypothalamus and some other structures. And then endbrain or telencephalon is the front part, and all the cortex and everything you see on an fMRI pictures in your neurology textbook, modern textbooks of fMRI and neuroimaging, most of them, 99.9% of them, are about cortex. And so now, one message of today's talk is do not overemphasize the importance of neocortex. Yes, it is very prominent in primates, but in the grand scheme of things, it is merely a part of the mammalian brain. So the mammalian brain has these four big parts. One of them is the end brain, and the cortex is one part of this end brain. The core structures of the brain actually lie below cortex. They're subcortical. And so don't underestimate the subcortex. This will be a prevailing, and the more you talk about affect and emotion and motivation, the more you're driven down to subcortical structures. So in cognitive science, we had a lot of kind of infatuation with cortex, and Broca's area and Wernicke's area and language areas and vision areas, primary visual cortex. It's all about cortex. But really, the important action in terms of agents and autonomy and motivations and goals tend to be in the subcortical structures. They play a much more extensive role in human mental life than has generally been acknowledged. And to make an analogy with computers, the subcortex is like the operating system of the computer. The cortex are the applications like email and word processing and web browser. This is in the cortex. But the operating system, the kernel that actually does scheduling and permissions, what files and things are accessible to different applications, this is part of the operating system. And even though it has only 1% of the code, arguably it is the most important part. And if you damage the operating system, the computer crashes. And similarly, if you damage the subcortical structures in the brainstem, the person either dies altogether or becomes paralyzed or has some debilitating mental health illness like schizophrenia or hallucinations or whatever. There are all kinds of mental diseases. A lot of them can be traced to the subcortical structures. And so to anticipate the answer to our motivating question, I'm like 6 minutes before the end here. Remember, the question was, can a less intelligent entity control a significantly more intelligent one? The mammalian architecture I will be arguing is the cortex is the more intelligent, late, kind of highly advanced structure that knows about language and knows about culture and knows about art and thinks it is like the most important, the pinnacle of creation. And yet, there is a sense in which and I will be telling you about that obviously next time, the subcortex sculpts, energizes, and strongly influences the neocortex. The subcortex is this ancient kind of reptilian brain. It is not very smart, but it is in the middle and it controls the power supply and it sets the agenda for the entire organism. And so there is hope, and I have heard YouTube talks by Jan LeCun and other prominent AI researchers saying we will be, with respect to superintelligence, we humans will be in the same relation to superintelligence that the subcortex in the mammalian brain is in relation to the cerebral cortex or the neocortex. So that gives some hope. This slide reminds me this idea isn't new. It goes all the way back to ancient Greece, like a lot of scientific concepts. There is a famous allegory by the Greek classic philosopher Plato in his dialogue Phaedrus. He tells this parable that the so-called tripartite model of the soul, that Plato didn't say model, but there is this myth. The soul is like a charioteer, a chariot. There are three parts, two different horses and a human charioteer. So the human in this is like Plato called it reason. It maps onto the neocortex of the brain. And then the two horses are subcortical structures. One is the desire, and it is blind and kind of obstinate and only listens to the whip. And the other is this noble ambition, thumos in Greek, and it doesn't need the whip. It kind of reacts to voice commands. You kind of talk to one horse and you have to really struggle with the other. But overall, reason is kind of barely keeping the chariot on the race course because the horses are the actual powerful animals that kind of propel the whole thing forward. And similarly, in the mammalian brain, there is this hierarchical functional organization. This is where we'll start for next time. So there is this hierarchy, different pieces here, that kind of hierarchy. And the cortex sits at the top. The subcortical structures are lower and lower. And so the oldest ones are the most important. And as you go over, down the line, you add newer and newer functions. So the spinal cord supports certain kind of functions, and then the hindbrain, these blue areas are, they support certain things, and then as you add new pieces, you get more and more advanced behavior. How can we study that? Well, 70 years ago, there were these very important series of studies involving some unfortunate animals, rats and cats and dogs and monkeys, and parts of their brains were kind of destroyed progressively back. And so if you take an intact animal, you study that, and then you take an animal without cortex, you cut away the cortex, and you have the so-called decorticate animal, and see what these animals can do. And they can do surprisingly many things. So the cortex is not really necessary. And then you take some more pieces of the brain, and the resulting structure can still do surprisingly many things. And so that would be where we'll go down the list next time, and build up this hierarchy, and then talk about how the different pieces interact and how they coordinate with each other. And that would be the selection problem.